few more folks trickling in, so we'll just give you a minute for the technology to catch up, and we will get started in just a minute. All right, it looks like folks have made it into from the lobby. So I want to say welcome. I'm Sharon Price-Singer from the SNAPS office and wanted to welcome you to this webinar talking about the ESG-CV closing out in Sage. We had a previous webinar at the end of June with a broader conversation about closeout and talking about financials. But today, we're going to be talking about closing out in Sage, and it's all tied together. So our friends at the Partnership Center are going to talk to you about how to do all the things you need to do, cross your T's and dot your I's before you get to this final stage. I know that only about 10% of our recipients right now are already ready for closeout, but I know that many others, especially with the September 30th deadline for expenditures coming up, that many of you will be in that circumstance soon. So just wanted to say welcome. Please take notes, but we will be answering questions either in the chat or Q&A. I think we have yet to determine, but I am going to pass it to Michelle Budzik from the Partnership Center to lead things off.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to spend about 60 minutes doing this, and you're all muted. Hopefully you see a Q&A button at the top of your screen or at the bottom of your screen. If you click that, that'll open the question and answer. The chat does not work, so we're not going in and out of two systems. We'll answer as many questions as possible during this time. If we can't get to them, we will post them on the HUD Exchange afterwards. This entire broadcast will be presented on the HUD Exchange. It's being taped. It'll go on the HUD Exchange within a couple of days, generally. So let's talk about closeout. There are some important dates for closeout process. These are the same dates that I believe you have received before, and they're the dates that are also listed in the closeout information that is at the top of your launch pad. In every report, there's a closeout document there. There's expenditures deadlines, there's draw deadlines, and then there's reporting deadlines. The expenditure deadlines means you have expended all the funds. It doesn't mean you've drawn them from IDIS. It doesn't necessarily mean you've paid the bills, but it means all the funds are committed and expended. The draw deadline is the deadline you have for drawing ESG-CV funds from IDIS. And unlike ESG, this isn't going to hang out there for you for a while. You really need to draw and plan on drawing by these deadline dates, or you're going to just miss out. They're not going to be able to hold it open because the odds of it getting swept back at that point are really high. So you really need to draw. I'm asked an awful lot when a project is closed. A project is closed in ESG-CV when they're not serving clients any longer with ESG-CV funding. So the shelter might stay open, probably will, but when they stop, when they run out of money, the project is closed. So that just is the overall overarching definition for that. You should have been closing your projects all along as they closed. Some of you did, some of you didn't. As you go in now, you want to close those projects when they actually closed to the best of your ability, especially the shelters, or you're going to have a huge overcount. So the closeout date is important, and it's always going to be the end of the month that you close out. So what happens to this stuff in HMIS? A temporary shelter is going to close or convert to a regular shelter in HMIS. An emergency shelter, nothing is going to happen. They shouldn't have opened a new project for ESG-CV or ESG. It's the shelter project is the shelter project, and that project will remain open in the HMIS. And if you fund it later with ESG money, it's going to be the same project. Rapid rehousing and homeless prevention, on the other hand, both of those projects close in the HMIS. They should have been open just for the use of ESG-CV. Now that ESG-CV is over, they should be closed and not used for other kinds of things. There's a few exceptions to that, and there's some ESG-CV closeout guidelines for HMIS folks on the HUD exchange, but those are not really your concern as much as they're the HMIS folks' concern, you as the recipients. So as we're going into Q12, most of you submitted and finished your quarter 11 report, and Q12 for everybody that didn't receive a reallocation is your last report with clients. So by October 30th, if you have spent all your funds and completed all the draws, you're going to close out. If you haven't, you're going to do one more report that's a financial only. Before you worry about money, before you worry about anything else, as you start your report, you've got to close the projects. There's a flashing light telling you to do that on your dashboard, on your launchpad. But I guess it's not big enough because folks aren't seeing it. So please, please, please close your projects before you bundle them and before you send out the data. If by October 30th you've spent all your funds, then on the financial form, you're going to indicate that and close. If you haven't, and you still have admin or HMIS to expend, then you can keep it open, close all your projects, and you'll close your finances the next quarter. Round 1 and 2 money. Some of you refer to the 2 pots of money as round 1 and 2. Those are what has to be expended by September 30th. That includes round 1 and 2 for the people with reallocations. So we've got to make sure that the 1 and 2 projects is closed and you're drawing the money as appropriate. If you have reallocation funds, then you're going to get till June 30th to do all of this. And the report that you would be submitting on July 30th, 2024 would be what you're thinking of, what I'm explaining here. That will be your last one where everything has to be in balance and go in. Let's talk about how to close out these projects in Sage. So you're on your project list in step 3, and there's an action here that says end project. You're going to click that end project button. This calendar is going to open up. You're going to pick the day, the month. If you have to go back a year, you can click the year to get it to go back and then pick the month. And don't forget to save it, or you have not actually closed the project. So as you're all finished with this and you're all finished with the page, just look up above and make sure that you're saving. If you're going to do a bunch of them at the same time, you can do that save and new. We built a quick close function. I can't decide if this is going to be to our benefit or not. It's to your benefit if you use it correctly. So if you are a large jurisdiction, if you are California or Florida or LA, maybe Texas, Miami, you're going to want to put, you can put your closing date in this box, and Sage will autofill all of the projects in that component with that date. So if you ran your shelters all the way till the end and they're going to close at the end, or they all closed on June 30th, then you can put June 30th in, and it's going to run down and populate that. If you're a small community with 2 or 3 or 4 projects, this doesn't make sense for you to try to do. But if you're a large community where you have 500 or 600 projects, now you're talking about some time saving. So once you put a date in, that's going to populate every project with that same date. If you populated all the projects with the same date and you went back and said, oh, shoot, this project didn't really end at that date, you can come in and click the end project button, and it will allow you to undo the action that you took before. So it'll allow you to put in a different date just for that particular project. So again, if you're somebody that has 200 shelters and most of them closed at the same time, you can go ahead and auto-populate it and then come back in and correct the ones that you need to correct. We're trying to make this so that we're not stressing you out on how this works. It's really important that the projects close, because HUD will carry forward, Sage will carry forward for HUD your ESG-CV data all the way through the reallocation period. And you don't want your clients to somehow fall off the count of being counted. So Sage is going to pull forward every cumulative bundle that you submit when the projects close. So all the cumulatives, even when you're not doing anything, you're finished reporting, your projects will continue to stay in the national report because they're being pulled forward automatically because you close them. When you close a project and it's already done its report, Sage will pull forward the report from the previous reporting period. At this point, if you've really messed up and haven't closed the projects from 2 or 3 quarters ago, Sage is not pulling the project's data forward from 2 or 3 quarters ago. It's pulling from the most recent quarter submitted from the previous quarter. We have some plans in the works to fix that, but I wouldn't plan that that's going to be corrected by the time you do your last report. So right now, if they reported previously, Sage is going to pull it forward, and you'll know it was pulled forward because it will read with this copied from previous note on the bundles. For those of you that understand that you can unbundle to make corrections in your projects if you need to after you bundle, these copied from previous don't matter. So you can unbundle even though Sage has pulled that forward and copied from previous quarters. To do your financial closeout, there is a section on your dashboard that shows you what was spent. And the total drawn that Sage is showing and the total drawn on your report in the total column, this last column, needs to be the same dollar amount in order for Sage to accept the closure. If you're doing your report and you just made your final draw yesterday, it is going to take some time for that data to populate. In general, IDIS data comes in every Friday into Sage and we upload it as soon as we get it. So sometime between Friday and Saturday, it's uploaded. So if you have to wait a few days to get this in balance, know that Sage is going to eventually catch up to IDIS. The date of the last draw is shown, or the last transfer of data is shown on your screen. To proceed to closeout, you're gonna balance that with the amount of money from IDIS. You're gonna say yes to the closeout. The total expenditures from your financial form is going to pull forward. You're going to sign the report saying that you agree that this is closeout. The recipient themselves should sign the form, please. If you're using a TA provider, if you're using a consultant, if you're using somebody else to help you with reporting and they have the ability to submit, you want to make sure it's you that's submitting. The recipient themselves should be the ones that are submitting at this point. If you aren't in balance, Sage is going to tell you you aren't in balance and it's not going to let you close. So there's no question that you're in balance if you close the report in Sage. If you're not in balance, go back and change the yes to no and take that next quarter then to balance yourself out. So don't panic. Take your time, get it right. But once you've closed out here, we can't reopen it. And it's already in balance. So close it out. Be very careful that you're closing this out correctly. Are there questions? Sharon, do we have questions? Meredith?
So two things. Yes, we have a question, but I am not sure that everyone is actually able to access the Q&A feature. So I think we're going to turn on the chat so that people can submit their questions in the chat. We did have one, though, that came in about whether or not if someone converted a night-by-night shelter into an emergency shelter and that shelter is still open, but they've spent all the CV funds, do they need to close that program out in HMIS?
The program in HMIS should have converted already to the regular emergency shelter if they made their conversion, which really is as simple as changing the funding source. It's not a huge big deal. So it would remain open in the HMIS. It will not remain open in your report. you will close that project even though the shelter is still going. You do need to go all the way to the end if you used renovation funds. So HUD has lifted the requirement that you have to report on this like for the next 3 years. Or 10 years, like sometimes you have to do if they've given you renovation funds, but you do have to have any project that was renovated going until your funding stops. So that would be next quarter if you have not received an allocation. If you have received a reallocation, you have to keep the reporting going through the reallocation period. So it's until your period of performance ends. You have something else, Meredith?
Do you mind going back a couple slides to the due dates?
That one?
Yeah, they just wanted to clarify that Q12 / last quarter isn't due in 30 days, just like the others. That's right, they get more time for their last QPR, correct?
Mm-hmm. The drop down deadline is this July 31st, 2024. HUD wants you to submit it by the next quarter. If you can't, the drop down deadline here is pushed out so that everybody has that same deadline.
Looks like lots of folks had questions that couldn't get in the Q&A, so we're gonna do a few here, Michelle.
Okay.
Does Sage show them which reports they have due depending on their reallocation status?
Sage is going to continue to open the reports if you have a reallocation of funds. So if you have what you think of as round 3, Sage will continue to open the report. When you submit one report, the next one will continue to open for you.
Thanks. After the last quarterly report, the subrecipient updated data in HMIS, so that was not captured in their bundle. Will it catch up next quarter?
Yes. No sweat. It's going to come in that cumulative bundle. That's what those cumulatives are for.
Should they enter negative amounts to balance their expenditures with IDIS?
Can't negative, I don't think, in IDIS, but you can negative in Sage. So the Sage report should be in balance completely to IDIS. And if you need to put a negative figure in the this month's cell to balance it out, you can go ahead and do that. You're going to balance to that total column in the end.
I'm gonna keep going here if that's good for you. Does that work? Okay. So if this person says, my understanding is there was no HMIS reporting requirement for projects that only received shelter renovation funding. Is that incorrect?
That is incorrect. You should have been reporting the entire time. If they got renovation funding, you need to put the project in, backdate it, bring in that cumulative report at least, and just go ahead and it will ask you, it will open up a box saying, why didn't you report this when you were supposed to, and just say you didn't know you were supposed to.
Okay, since reporting is done in Sage and project setup is in IDIS, is there anything required to do in IDIS for ESG-CV?
I don't think I understand the question.
I'm not sure either, and I don't know who asked that. So unknown user, if that is your question, if you could add some additional context in the chat or submit an AAQ with that one. That might be specific to you.
Sharon, if you're on, you might need to answer that. I got to tell you, I'm not an expert in IDIS, folks.
Which question? I'm sorry.
It's from unknown user at 252. It's since reporting
Got
is
it.
done in Sage and project setup is in IDIS, is there anything required to do an IDIS for ESG-CV?
That all the funds have to be drawn. There has to be a zero balance. And that all the activities have to be reported correctly. That's, to my knowledge, that's the answer, but let me see if there's any more specifics that I'm missing. Yeah, we have, just to understand, there's some resources that have been delayed with some IDIS specifics. And so there's a cheat sheet coming out, hopefully momentarily. And in fact, the connection to the slides, if I can put that in the chat, from the previous training should also have that. So let me put this in the slide in the chat, and hopefully that'll help.
HUD made the decision a while ago to use Sage and the sign signature you're doing here as your official closeout signature for ESG-CV, which is why I'm saying make sure that you did it yourself. You do the signature yourself.
This person wants to confirm their IDIS funded amount is $20,000 less than what is reported in Sage. Do they need to reopen all reports to change the amounts or just the most recent one to make them match?
Don't go back. We don't go back. We don't reopen the prior quarters. You make it match in the most recent one. So if you haven't submitted Q11 yet, go ahead and fix it in Q11. Otherwise, you're going to do it in Q12. And that's why you can put a negative figure in, because we're not letting you reopen it and correct it. The ESG-CV reports, unlike lots of reports that you submit for all kinds of other things, they went summarized to Congress right away. HUD didn't sit and hold the information. So the most recent information, not on you particularly, but on the whole project as a whole, has already been submitted. So that's why they wanted this to come in quarterly in a timely fashion.
If they need to return funds and redraw them, they can, this is the question, can they do that up until April 30th of 2024?
I think so. Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure what why funds would be returned and then redrawn. So if there's something specific or it's just a general concern, I think at this point that would not be a scenario that would probably play out.
Sharon, it's if they drew it from the wrong category. If they drew it from shelter instead of, yeah.
And would they be able to fix that, to go back in and fix it? I think that's that they would be able to fix it in terms of the draw deadline, if it was prior to the draw deadline. But hopefully nobody will be in that situation by April 30th, 2024.
All right, next one. If an agency received additional funds and used them to fund rapid rehousing services, the project was previously closed, should the agency be reopened as a new project, or can it be reopened in Sage?
I can reopen it if there's not a gap. If there's a substantial gap between when the project first closed and when you reopened it to fund it again, then you want to open a new project. If there's not a gap, if you say very clearly in the AAQ what project it is and what should have happened with it and what you did wrong, I'll go ahead and go in the back end and fix it for you.
Thanks. This one is just some clarification on the dates again. In Sage, they see a due date of 10/30/2023 for the quarter that just ended. Did you say they have until July 31st of 2024?
That's what HUD said.
If they've reached 100%.
Well, right.
Only if you've reached 100%. So if you have expended and drawn all your funds, then you have until July 31st. If you are still drawing, then you would need to submit potentially another QPR. Does that sound right, Michelle?
Thanks.
If you're confused about what you need to do, if you put in an AAQ, we'll help you. We'll look it up for you.
Would ESG-CV be set up in IDIS by each individual community? I have never drawn for ESG-CV from IDIS.
If you are the recipient, let's do that one more time. If you are the recipient, that means that the grant came to you from HUD and you are only a recipient if you are a city, county, state, or territory. If you are the recipient, then you would have been drawing. Otherwise, no. If you have an ESG-CV report in Sage with your jurisdiction's name on that report, you are a recipient, you should have been drawing. I think at this point, if you haven't drawn and you should have been, they would have been all over you.
Yeah. We've got somebody asking for a little bit of clarification on the question around whether or not reporting was required for a shelter that received renovation funds. So they're saying, can you speak more to this question? If the funding was used on renovations, they're still supposed to report on services? Question mark. They don't fully understand. So maybe, do you want to say that piece again?
Yeah, I can say it again. So here's the rule. If we spent $1 in your shelter, I don't care what it was on. We paid the light bill, we paid for staff, we fixed the furnace. It doesn't matter what that $1 paid for. Everybody in the shelter counts. And unless it's really minor renovation, then you're going to report that all the way through the end of the reporting period. If you don't know if what you did was renovation versus a little fix-it-up rehab kind of thing, and I might be using those words backwards because I every once in a while do that, check with us. Or check with your CARES Act staff. They would be able to help you on that one too.
I think they're asking if no clients were served or nobody was housed in the shelter during that time. But if anyone was in the shelter or being assisted, then that needs to be accounted for.
And we do recognize that there are a couple of you, I think I know who you all are, that have shelters that are still going to be renovated after the fact that you are using other monies too, and those will not open during ESG-CV. HUD recognizes that and knows that you can't report clients because there's nobody in there by the time we end it.
Also follow up, what do you consider a substantial gap in that question where you said if there was a substantial gap, they needed to create a new project?
If it's an RH project or an HP project, the gap can be a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, because in theory, that's the only people that are in that project are the people that were funded under ESG-CV. If it's a shelter, we don't want to go more than 30 days.
Do links automatically go out to all the previously closed project bundles or just to open project bundles?
I'm sorry, I must have missed something there.
Do links automatically go out to all previously closed project bundles or just to open project bundle?
Just to open ones. So if you see this copied from previous on the bundle line, no email is going out. If they have other projects they were reporting on for the HMIS, that project will show that it's already been submitted.
This person has a question about their project names. Originally, their project names were generic, but they moved to using more specific project names. Are you able to combine these project names?
Yes, or you can use the, there's a notes field in your report that you can go in and edit and put whatever you want to put in that field. And that will carry it forward. There is not a real point in changing the project's names at this point of the game, unless you've gotten reallocated funds. I've done it for some of you that just have had like total panic about it, but there's not a whole lot of value to making it match. The value of the project name was to make sure that the HMIS was pulling the right project for you. So if that's all done, we don't need to change the names. But if you want to put something in that talks about differences in names, then in step 3, edit the project and put it in the optional tag field. You can write whatever you want there.
Will you go back to slide 5 again?
Mm-hmm.
Someone's got questions still about dates. So do we have to have all ESG-CV funding except admin and HMIS drawn by September 30th, 2023?
You have to have it expended by September 30th, 2023. Remember, expenditure means you paid for it. It doesn't mean you paid the bill, and it doesn't mean you drew it down from IDIS. It means you paid for it. So the shelter paid the bill. You paid somebody's rent. RRH paid somebody's rent. That's what an expenditure is. The deadline for the draws means you've drawn it then from IDIS.
Looks like we have someone who in Q9 submitted their final report, did all their closeout stuff, did their certification statement, everything was done. They did not submit a Q10 QPR, but Sage is showing that they have a report to be completed. Do they need to submit Q10 even though there's no data?
No. If you sign the closeout, you don't have to submit anymore. And if that's happening, we'll get the programmers to turn it off for you.
Confirming dates again. So if the shelter started spending their CV funding on renovation in January of 2023, then the Sage project would be dated January 2023 to September 2023 funding end date.
Yep.
Someone tried to reopen a project but was unsuccessful. Was this because they had already sent the bundles?
Yeah, if you've sent your bundles out, you can't reopen. If they haven't started submitting their data, then you can delete the bundles and go ahead and make your corrections. Remember that 3-day hold that we had so much trouble with in the beginning? That was what that 3-day hold was for, so that you could bring back the bundles, delete the bundles, fix it, and send them out again. If you haven't submitted and you missed it at this point, go ahead and submit without the project and put it in Q12.
This is probably maybe one for Sharon. I'm not sure. Are you going to cover how to close out if you're finished with the program, but you have a balance for HUD to recover?
That is a very good question. I saw that. I would say that guidance will be forthcoming. We need to hit the expenditure deadline first and the draw deadline. I think as that is clear that folks have remaining funds, we will have a process in place to make that happen. So stay tuned.
But you can close out in Sage with a balance that you're not going to spend. So once you close out here, you've closed out ESG. If you have $10 sitting there that HUD has to recapture, go ahead and close it out in Sage, you're done. And if HUD needs you to do something else, they'll let you know.
And just to be clear, says we can only close projects when we start working on our next quarterly report, or will we be able to log into Sage anytime to close them? They can close them anytime, can't they? They don't have to wait.
Yeah, your report is open now. Just put in a due date that's way after in step 1 there, put in a due date that's after September 30th, and you can work on closing your projects now for the next 3 months. That's fine.
This person has a few projects with contracts that expire on September 30th, but the projects have already finished, already expended all of their funding. Should they report up until September 30th? Or up until the funds were all spent / the project finished?
All spent. I think that's the biggest misnomer, is that people are you're trying to run these by your contract dates, and it doesn't work. So they end when they stop spending money. Whatever the month was that they ran out of money is the month you should have ended the project. Which again, doesn't make a whole lot of difference for RH and HP. It definitely does for the shelters, and it could for outreach, depending on how they set their outreach projects up.
Meredith, let me go back to a question from Charlotte. She asks, is there a required percentage for the reallocated funds that must be spent by September 30th, 2023? So if you have received reallocated funds, you need to have expended your original rounds 1 and 2 by September 30th. So it's only those new funds, and it's not that we attach it to actual specific dollars, like it's not tied to when the dollars were given to you. So whatever the amount was that was reallocated, that is the maximum amount that you can continue to draw through June 30th, 2024. There's no specific percentage that you should have expended by that date, but most likely a lot of folks who got reallocations will have already dug into those funds.
Sorry, we jumped around here for a second. Sarah's question, back to the renovations, but also sort of piggybacking on what we were just talking about. So if it's a renovation project, do you end the project when the funding is spent, or at the end of the period of performance?
When you're ending the project when the funds are spent, ignore that period of performance.
Even on a renovation grant where maybe they didn't have clients.
Oh, I'm sorry, renovation. If it's renovation, you gotta go the whole time. Because remember, HUD has a use requirement on these properties, and that goes the whole time here. They've stopped your reporting. If you got continuum of care money, for example, to build something, you're reporting for the next 10 or 15 years on it, regardless of whether you continue to get funded or not. ESG has some rules like that, not as strict, but they were all waived for this. So
Thanks. What if HMIS is their only funding left to spend? Do they still need to send in bundles?
no, as long as all you see, that's why we pulled your bundles forward, because they're sitting there ready to go. So if everything is closed and all of your data says the project's closed and you're just waiting for an HMIS final expenditure, then you can hold it out a little bit and wait. If you're going to hold it out a long time, go ahead and submit and then reopen and just put the HMIS in there, and you don't have to do anything with the bundles. You just go through the process and it all pulls forward. Part of the reason that we pulled this forward was because we knew that at the end you were going to have this issue with the timing and getting everything just perfectly right on time.
Any? Okay. Sharon, are you seeing those questions from Carrie? I
All
think that's
caps
what,
questions.
yeah, I think that's what Michelle's speaking to, but I'm not sure if there's a nuance in there that I'm missing.
Let's see. Are you asking about the first or the second one?
I was asking about the first one. So whatever the date they run out of money is the day you close the project, but what if there are financial adjustments or credit memos 3 months out after money is run out? And then I think, Michelle, is that what you were speaking to? Yeah, and they followed up with HUD's determination that the project closes in Sage on the day the subrecipient ran out of money. What CPD notice is this published?
I don't know that that's accurate, that the day they run out of money that the project closes out. So if what
Oh,
you're
yeah,
saying
sure.
is, what's that?
Yeah, it is.
It is? Okay, I
Yeah.
apologize then. I defer to Michelle on everything. If I answer and she says no, she's right. So, do you know the answer to which notice it's published in? Or which letter? I would have to go back to identify that.
Yeah, so there's not notices for reporting. The closest they came to notices are those reporting guidances that are on your dashboard. So those are as close as they came to giving you reporting guidance. And in there, I think several times we've said that.
All right, we will
I'm
try
not
to.
sure what the problem is. If you explain what you think is wrong with that, maybe there's a workaround for you. So
It sounds like maybe there's a concern about changes that will happen that may adjust what that was reported, that changes that come after the funds are expended.
So closing your projects has nothing to do with your expenditures. One more time on that one. Expenditures means you've spent the money. It doesn't mean you've made all the draws. It doesn't mean you've paid all the bills. So you can still have adjustments to between IDIS and Sage, or what you've reimbursed for a particular project, all the way until you close out. that doesn't matter. There's nothing that matters there. What HUD needed was the projects closed when they closed, so we stopped counting clients served in that particular project.
I think that gets to I think that's what they were asking. And if not, please post again, but I think that gets to it. Thank you.
If a project was under contract and will not spend all of the funds by September 30th, I would be reporting on what funds were dispersed during the contract period and unspent funds for the project are recaptured then, correct?
Yes. Hopefully you spend them all.
Yes, we are very eager for people to spend all their funds. And there's still time.
There is still time.
And I'd like to remind people, if you have not compensated your HMIS for doing all the work that they did during this time, you could have been compensating them the whole time. These unspent funds at the last minute here could go back and compensate them for all of the data pulling and data work that they did. So just keep that in mind as you think about what do you do with some of these monies.
So there's two that I want to still say. One was Michelle provides amazing support. Thanks, Michelle, for everything. That was a very nice comment we got there.
Thank you.
With lots of thumbs up and hearts. I also want to say someone did mention, which I know you're going to get to, and we've got about 8 minutes left, but there was a lull in questions. So someone wanted you to point out the changes in Sage with the new dashboard. So it's like they read your mind. And again, I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so maybe we can transition to that. And then as folks are thinking, can pop up any questions for the last few minutes here.
So my fun problem is going to be, how do I switch screens?
So hit stop sharing.
Okay.
Now share the right screen.
Okay. Here we go. Your new dashboard, as you come into Sage, looks like this. If you are only an ESG recipient, you'll only have the ESG button. If you are also a recipient of COC funds or YHDP funds, you'll have buttons for that. And once rural and unsheltered comes into Sage, there's a button for rural and unsheltered. When you click the different buttons, a different notebook appears that has your grants in it. If you have a bunch of different user levels, you will find that this is a really helpful thing. We had lots of trouble with people going in and out of different projects in Sage. And in some places they had view only rights, and in other places they had rights to change stuff, and they never knew what they were doing, and they were flipping around back and forth a lot. No more flipping around. This is your own personal dashboard. So whatever your user account says you're allowed to use, allowed to see or allowed to work on, that's what shows in on your dashboard. For ESG, the annual paper that you're supposed to be working on is here. It's always going to show you that there's one waiting and flash at you, and all the previous ones are here. So it's the same thing for ESG and ESG-CV. And if you are one of the rush communities down in Florida, Massachusetts is not a rush community, but if you are one of the rush communities down in Florida, you would also then have a rush report when your reports are due. the tools and resources up here bring you to charts and data. Bring you to the reports, brings you to resources. Your there's a training video on what just happened in Sage. There's a manual on using Sage, but there's also manuals on ESG and COC and other kind of special reporting guidance, where you can just view them all and kind of scroll through them. There's a link to the HUD Exchange here and a link to ask a question. All of your reports are sitting right here for you to see and use. You can always go home by clicking the Sage logo or by clicking this little button here. If you don't know how your account is set up, if you click on Update My Account, it will show you what entities you have affiliations to. If you need to add an association, you can add an association. It's going to have to be approved for you to actually get that association. You can't just decide yourself. You want to see some community on the other side of the country that you're really not affiliated with. Sage won't let you do that, and will ask that community to approve you or the field office.
So Michelle, this question came up in the chat a little bit. If folks aren't seeing what they are expecting to be seeing, like they aren't seeing their ESG recipient or something like that, do they need to go in and update their associations? Is that the advice you would give them, to go verify that they have the right associations?
You don't see ESG. You never had access to ESG in the past. So if you need ESG and you don't see it, then yes, you need to update your associations. Again, I'm going to tell you, if you are not the recipient, you do not need and should not have access to the recipient's report in Sage. So if you are the VSP, if you are an HMIS lead, if you are a subrecipient, you should not really be in the recipient's report in Sage. And there are only really a few exceptions that make sense to that for the recipient to do.
Hopefully that answers Evangeline's question. I think that's what their situation is. So just to let folks know, the slides and recording will be on the HUD Exchange in the very near future. Might take a few days. There are also, as Meredith put in the chat, there are closeout instructions already in Sage, and we have some on the HUD Exchange as well. And there's additional resources that I put in the chat with the checklists and the recording from our previous training, and I will put that in now. But thank you, Michelle, and the whole partnership team for getting us all through this. It's been a long 3 years. So
it has been indeed. Thanks, Sharon. Take care, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.